In early 1941, the Battle of the Atlantic had reached a perilous intensity. German U-boats prowled the North Sea and the Norwegian coast, cutting supply lines vital to Britain's war effort. Amid this chaos, the Royal Navy initiated a series of patrols so secretive that they were deliberately excluded from official logs. These operations, known only to a handful of Admiralty officers, involved small flotillas of destroyers, corvettes, and armed trawlers, often sailing without full navigational charts, tasked with shadowing enemy convoys and testing unproven detection equipment. Officially, these patrols did not exist. Unofficially, they were the tip of a shadow war being waged under the cold, gray skies of the North Atlantic. The men aboard these vessels faced conditions that were as brutal as they were unpredictable. Freezing temperatures, storms that could snap a mast in minutes, and near-constant fog were only part of the challenge. Lieutenant Commander James H. Caldwell, commanding HMS Vigilant, wrote in his personal diary on March 12, 1941, "We sail into waters even the Admiralty fears to name. There is no glory here, only the thin promise of survival and the shadow of those we may never see." Crews were often given vague objectives and minimal intelligence, with orders to report nothing beyond the coded acknowledgments that their missions had begun. The patrols targeted stretches of coastline where German supply lines were least expected to be challenged. Along the Norwegian fjords, small Royal Navy units would navigate in near silence, their sonar equipment experimental, their depth charges reserved for critical strikes. These forbidden patrols often coincided with conventional operations, but their routes, objectives, and outcomes were deliberately kept off paper. Commanders sometimes deployed decoy signals to mislead even their own intelligence officers. Every movement was a calculated gamble. The risk of disappearance was ever present. On April 3, 1941, HMS Seawolf, a Flower-class corvette, departed Scapa Flow for an unlogged patrol near the Lofoten Islands. No official record exists of its route or orders. Only fragmented radio transmissions hint at a brief encounter with a German patrol boat before silence fell for nearly 3 days. When the vessel returned, the crew was tight-lipped, aware that any mention of the engagement would be erased from official history. For families waiting at home, these absences became shadows on the calendar, a silence that carried its own weight of fear. Historians examining Admiralty archives have found only hints of these early forbidden missions, partially redacted dispatches, cryptic code phrases, and occasional mentions in the margins of operational logs. The very act of forgetting these patrols speaks to their sensitive nature. Some were intelligence-gathering missions, others were trials of radar and ASTIC systems that would later prove critical to the Battle of the Atlantic. Yet for the sailors aboard, there was no recognition, only the quiet knowledge that failure could mean not just death, but erasure from history. Personal accounts, where they exist, reveal both the courage and the burden of secrecy. Leading seaman Arthur Whitfield recalled in a post-war interview, "We were told never to speak of the patrols. Some of us kept journals, but even then I crossed out entire entries. It wasn't just about secrecy from the enemy, we weren't supposed to exist, at least not officially." These human stories add a haunting layer to the strategic purpose behind the missions. Courage under orders that demanded silence, resilience in the face of near-impossible odds, and the constant pressure of operating in zones where the line between enemy and environment was indistinct. By summer 1941, patterns began to emerge. The forbidden patrols were testing new tactics: night navigation without lights, silent approaches to enemy shipping, and the use of decoy vessels to lure German U-boats into observation zones. The Admiralty's goal was clear: gather intelligence, disrupt supply lines, and experiment with technology under conditions too sensitive to risk in logged operations. Yet for the men executing these orders, the stakes were intensely personal: a daily confrontation with death, isolation, and the moral weight of invisibility. As HMS Vigilant steamed north past the jagged cliffs of the Norwegian coast in late June, the crew faced yet another storm, the roar of waves and wind masking the creaking hull and the distant echoes of enemy guns. Orders were received in code, objectives vaguely outlined, and the true measure of success was survival coupled with any intelligence gleaned. And as the patrol disappeared into the fog, leaving no official trace, the question lingered: how many of these missions would vanish entirely from history, leaving only whispered stories, fragmented logs, and unanswered mysteries in their wake? The Shadow War had begun, and its full scope remained just beyond the horizon. By mid-1942, the clandestine Royal Navy patrols had intensified, extending into the perilous waters of the Danish Straits and the Skagerrak. Intelligence reports suggested a surge in German U-boat activity along these crucial maritime choke points, threatening to sever Britain's lifeline of supplies from Scandinavia and the Arctic convoys bound for the Soviet Union. Conventional patrols were insufficient to detect or counter these stealthy submarines, prompting the Admiralty to authorize a series of forbidden missions, invisible on all official charts and orders. These patrols became a chess game of shadows, with destroyers and corvettes moving like ghosts, their operations deliberately concealed even from the fleets they sailed alongside. The men faced the dual challenge of hostile waters and extreme secrecy. Winter storms brought snow, ice, and waves that could break a ship's structure in minutes, while dense fog often reduced visibility to a few meters. Lieutenant Henry M. Bracken, commanding HMS Tempest, noted in a coded log on February 14, 1942, "We navigate as phantoms. The Germans may never see us, but neither may the Admiralty should fate turn against our vessel." Communication was restricted to brief, encrypted radio bursts, and in many cases entire patrols operated without radio contact, relying solely on prearranged rendezvous points. The missions were meticulously designed yet inherently dangerous. Patrol routes were calculated to intercept U-boats attempting to reach the North Atlantic from German ports in Kiel and Hamburg. Armed with depth charges and experimental ASTIC sonar, the crews had to distinguish between actual enemy vessels and misidentified flotsam, often under cover of darkness and in freezing temperatures. On March 3, HMS Falcon, a newly commissioned Tribal-class destroyer, reported shadowing a German convoy near the Jutland coast. The engagement was brief and undocumented, and the crew's personal diaries offer only fragmented observations: a fleeting silhouette of a U-boat periscope, the hiss of depth charges, and the silence that followed. Some patrols disappeared entirely. HMS Nightingale, assigned to survey the Skagerrak in March 1942, failed to return to Rosyth. Official records list the vessel as missing, presumed lost, but no details were ever logged publicly. Subsequent declassified reports indicate a probable encounter with a German surface raider, yet the absence of survivor testimony leaves a shroud of uncertainty. Families at home received no explanation, and among the surviving sailors, speculation and rumor became the only record. These absences amplified the tension surrounding the forbidden patrols, turning routine missions into enigmas of naval history. The human element of secrecy weighed heavily on the crews. Every sailor understood that survival was only part of the equation. Discretion was equally vital. Petty Officer William Harris later recalled, "We were told to expect nothing and to speak of nothing. Even if we returned, our stories were ours alone." The isolation and moral burden of operating in secret created a unique psychological strain, where camaraderie was essential but silence was compulsory. Officers often kept cryptic entries in private logs, striking phrases such as "observed enemy, no engagement." Silence maintained that conveyed more through omission than words. Tactically, the forbidden patrols experimented with unorthodox methods. Vessels sometimes used false flag maneuvers to pass enemy checkpoints or feigned mechanical failures to lure German reconnaissance closer. Convoys of small merchant ships were occasionally employed as decoys, with patrol ships shadowing from a distance to observe enemy reactions. These maneuvers were risky, as a single misstep could trigger confrontation with a far superior German force or draw attention that would compromise the broader Atlantic strategy. Each patrol became a high-stakes test of courage, ingenuity, and discretion. As 1942 progressed, the forbidden patrols revealed the dual nature of war at sea. Innovation and danger intertwined with the uncertainty of official recognition. Reports from the period describe fleeting encounters with unidentified Allied submarines, encounters so brief and secretive that neither side left a written record. The specter of loss loomed over every mission, as commanders knew that failure could erase not only a ship but also the very existence of its story. By summer, the question haunting the Admiralty and the sailors alike was clear: how many vessels would vanish without trace, and how many would return bearing intelligence whose significance could only be guessed? In the shadowy waters of the Danish Straits, under the cover of winter storms and the constant threat of enemy detection, the Royal Navy pressed forward. Each patrol was a gamble, a silent duel in which the enemy might never be seen, yet the consequences of discovery were deadly. As HMS Tempest slipped through the icy channel on a moonless night, the crew could only wonder if the next transmission might be the last, a mystery left untold in the official annals of history, waiting for decades to be pieced together by those who would later search the forbidden logs for answers. By 1943, the clandestine Royal Navy patrols had evolved into some of the most audacious operations of the war. The focus shifted to the heavily defended ports of occupied France, particularly Cherbourg, Brest, and the approaches to the Normandy coastline. These missions were not conventional patrols. They were reconnaissance and sabotage operations carried out under the cover of darkness, designed to gather intelligence on enemy fortifications, naval deployments, and supply routes. Small flotillas of destroyers, minesweepers, and armed trawlers navigated treacherous waters, often within sight of German coastal batteries, relying on stealth, precision, and the sheer nerve of their crews. The human and tactical challenges were immense. Patrols were ordered to approach within a few kilometers of German-occupied ports, avoiding detection from searchlights, coastal artillery, and the newly deployed radar stations along the coast. Lieutenant Commander Peter Langley, commanding HMS Sentinel, wrote in a diary entry dated April 17, 1943, "The enemy may see us or not. Every shadow could be a gun, every light a beacon to our doom. We sail in silence, and our success is measured only in the absence of discovery." Navigation relied heavily on dead reckoning and brief, prearranged signals, as radio silence was mandatory to prevent interception. One of the most remarkable missions involved HMS Ardent, a J-class destroyer, which entered the approaches to Cherbourg on the night of May 5. The crew observed German patrol boats and supply barges, taking careful note of patrol patterns and defensive layouts. The ship's ASTIC and radar equipment, still in experimental stages, were tested under real combat conditions, proving their potential in detecting submerged submarines and small surface craft. For the sailors aboard, the mission was nerve-wracking. A single error could provoke a barrage of gunfire or the detonation of hidden mines, ending the patrol in catastrophe. The intelligence gathered was equally enigmatic. Reports returned from these missions often consisted of cryptic codes, diagrams, and sketch maps, deliberately stripped of identifying details to protect the crews and sources. Lieutenant Bracken, observing the Brest harbor, noted, "We see movement, numbers, and timing, but who commands these waters remains hidden. The pattern is ours alone to decipher." Many of these records remained classified for decades, hidden in Admiralty files or encrypted logs that would not be accessible until long after the war's end. Despite the operational risks, these patrols also revealed the adaptability and courage of the crews. Sailors navigated in pitch darkness, relying on the smallest cues, light reflections on water, distant engine sounds, the smell of salt and fuel, to gauge enemy presence. Minesweepers often preceded destroyers to detect and clear obstacles, a dangerous task that required both skill and nerves of steel. Every maneuver was a delicate balance between aggression and caution, with survival dependent on coordination, timing, and silence. Some patrols, however, ended in mystery. HMS Vigilant, assigned to shadow enemy barges near Cherbourg on June 12, failed to report back for 3 days. When it returned, the crew was tight-lipped, and official logs made no mention of the engagement. Sailors later admitted only that the ship had encountered an unmarked vessel that appeared to be a disguised German supply ship, but no details were recorded officially. These omissions reinforced the forbidden nature of the missions. They existed in reality but not on paper, a parallel record of the war known only to a select few. By late 1943, the lessons of these patrols began to inform broader naval strategy. The intelligence collected helped refine convoy routing, improve anti-submarine tactics, and anticipate enemy movements along the French coast. Yet for the men executing the missions, the immediate concern was far more personal: surviving the night, returning to their home ports, and maintaining the silence that had been demanded from the start. Every patrol carried the weight of secrecy, a silent acknowledgement that their efforts might never be recognized, and their sacrifices might remain unrecorded. As HMS Sentinel slipped away from the shadowed harbor approaches, the crew could only speculate about what they had seen, and what they had narrowly avoided. The waters off the French coast held both vital intelligence and unseen dangers, leaving lingering questions that would haunt the sailors and the Admiralty alike. Each mission completed successfully added a piece to a larger, hidden puzzle, yet the full picture of these forbidden patrols remained tantalizingly out of reach, waiting for historians to reconstruct decades later. And in the silent cold of the North Sea and English Channel, the shadow of unlogged encounters and vanished ships continued to loom, a mystery of courage, risk, and secrecy that the war had demanded be kept from the public eye. In 1944, the Royal Navy's forbidden patrols expanded beyond direct reconnaissance into coordination with intelligence networks and resistance groups, particularly in Norway. As the war entered its later stages, the Allies recognized that detailed knowledge of German movements along fjords, harbors, and supply routes could decisively influence both naval and ground operations. Patrols now carried not only naval objectives but also critical intelligence to be handed over to the Special Operations Executive, SOE, whose agents coordinated with local resistance cells. These operations were carried out under extreme secrecy, often with multiple overlapping objectives, where the line between conventional naval duty and clandestine espionage became almost indistinguishable. The human cost of secrecy grew heavier. Crews operated under extreme conditions: icy waters, narrow fjords, and the ever-present threat of German patrols and hidden mines. Lieutenant Commander Richard Hastings, in a coded note dated February 21, 1944, described the tension: "We sail among shadows. Every fjord could conceal an enemy craft. Every mountain might watch our passage. We trust only in silence and the skill of our crew." Communication with shore authorities was nearly non-existent. Patrols relied on prearranged signals with resistance contacts, sometimes involving small fishing vessels that served as couriers or observation points, all while remaining unrecorded in any official naval logs. Encounters during these patrols were often cryptic and puzzling. There are reports of brief meetings with unmarked Allied submarines or merchant vessels, details of which remain obscured in surviving logs. One particular mission involved HMS Nightjar, a Hunt-class destroyer, shadowing a convoy along the Norwegian coast. Crew diaries mention a sudden encounter with an unidentified ship whose actions were deliberate and coordinated, yet whether it was an Allied ally, an SOE operation, or a German decoy remains unclear. Such incidents heighten the mystery surrounding these forbidden patrols. Moments of contact and observation that were deliberately excluded from public records, leaving historians to speculate decades later. The psychological strain on sailors was profound. Every decision carried dual consequences: the immediate threat of enemy fire and the moral obligation of secrecy. Leading seaman Thomas Whitmore recalled, "We knew that what we saw and did might never be acknowledged. If something went wrong, it would disappear as though we had never been there." This secrecy extended to families, many of whom waited months or years for news, unaware that their loved ones were involved in high-stakes operations far from the conventional battlefield. Tactical innovation was a hallmark of these operations. Crews experimented with unlit approaches, using fjords' natural concealment to navigate close to enemy positions. Observations were made through binoculars, periscopes, and early radar units, all while avoiding direct confrontation unless absolutely necessary. Reports sometimes described German fortifications, troop movements, and supply chains, yet only in coded or deliberately vague language that would obscure details if intercepted. These missions became exercises not only in seamanship but in intelligence gathering and operational discretion, blending naval skill with clandestine tradecraft. Some patrols ended with lingering mysteries. HMS Peregrine, operating near Trondheim in March 1944, returned with accounts of shadowy enemy movements but no physical evidence of engagement. Its crew reported observing unmarked vessels and coded signals exchanged with the shore, yet no official logs recorded the events. Historians reviewing declassified files have pieced together fragments of the mission, but gaps remain. Which vessels were German, which were part of SOE operations, and how much intelligence was successfully transmitted are questions that persist. By mid-1944, these clandestine patrols had become a critical component of Allied intelligence operations in Scandinavia. The combination of naval skill, bravery under extreme conditions, and absolute secrecy created a network of missions whose full scope was never publicly acknowledged. The information gathered contributed to the planning of broader operations, including Arctic convoys and preparations for the liberation of Western Europe. Yet for the men executing the patrols, the immediate reality remained stark: survival, precision, and silence. As HMS Nightjar steamed back through the icy fjords under the cover of darkness, the crew was left with unanswered questions. The unmarked vessels, the fleeting signals from shore, and the shadows that moved in the fjords all hinted at a complex web of covert operations, intelligence handovers, and untold dangers. These patrols were no longer simple naval missions; they were part of a hidden war fought in silence, whose full story would remain obscured for decades. The mystery of who was watched, who observed, and what knowledge was gained lingered in the minds of the sailors, a tension that would carry forward into the final chapters of the forbidden Royal Navy patrols. By early 1945, as the Third Reich teetered on the brink of collapse, the Royal Navy embarked on its final series of forbidden patrols along the coasts of Germany and the Low Countries. These missions were among the most audacious of the war, designed to gather intelligence on the crumbling Nazi naval infrastructure, secret munitions depots, and coastal command centers. Small destroyers, frigates, and armed motor launches navigated shallow estuaries, mine-laden harbors, and heavily defended rivers with the express purpose of observing and documenting enemy positions without drawing attention. Once again, these patrols were never to be recorded in official logs, preserving both the secrecy of the operations and the safety of those involved. The dangers were as extreme as ever. HMS Blackwood, a Type II Hunt-class escort destroyer, patrolled the Weser estuary in March 1945. Ice floes, submerged wrecks, and the constant threat of mines presented persistent hazards, compounded by the proximity of German coastal artillery and sporadic machine gun fire from remaining shore defenses. Commander Thomas Arkwright wrote in a coded operational note, "We move as shadows, threading between danger and opportunity. Every observation risks our lives. Every success may remain unseen." Crew members reported tension so thick it was palpable. The knowledge that even a minor error could be fatal, yet the pressure to collect actionable intelligence was immense. These patrols often yielded highly sensitive intelligence. Reports from HMS Falconer, for example, included detailed schematics of concealed munitions storage along the Elbe and Rhine estuaries, locations of previously uncharted U-boat pens, and observations of troop movements that suggested imminent evacuations. However, much of this information was classified so deeply that even the men aboard were given only partial instructions. Their primary task was observation, and discretion was paramount. The distinction between success and survival was razor-thin, as patrols could vanish from history as easily as from radar screens. Yet, not all patrols returned intact. Several vessels, including HMS Sparrowhawk and HMS Kestrel, failed to report after missions in the Frisian Islands, leaving families and naval command alike in uncertainty. Declassified notes later indicated these ships likely encountered minefields or small German patrol craft, but the details remain incomplete. Such disappearances reinforced the perilous nature of these missions. They were vital, secret, and inherently dangerous, with the added burden that any loss would be deliberately obfuscated from official records. The fate of crew members sometimes became known only through survivor testimonies decades later, offering glimpses into operations that the Royal Navy had deliberately erased. For the sailors, the psychological strain remained immense. Many expressed a sense of detachment from the broader war effort, knowing that their contributions were invisible to history. Leading seaman George Pritchard recalled, "We were told our work was critical, yet we might never see acknowledgement. We watched, we recorded, we survived and waited for a world that would forget us." Despite the isolation, the crews exhibited extraordinary discipline and courage, performing complex navigation, surveillance, and intelligence-gathering tasks under conditions that would daunt even the most seasoned officers. The tactical methods employed were increasingly sophisticated. Coastal reconnaissance relied on stealthy night approaches, camouflaged vessels, and prearranged rendezvous with intelligence operatives. Occasionally, patrols coordinated with remnants of Allied ground forces or SOE agents to confirm enemy positions, all without leaving any trace in conventional naval records. These operations blurred the line between maritime warfare and espionage, turning each patrol into a high-stakes test of skill, endurance, and discretion. Every observation mattered. Every mistake could be fatal. As the war drew to a close, these final forbidden patrols became repositories of hidden knowledge. Locations of secret naval bases, remaining U-boat pens, and the patterns of retreating German forces. Yet even as the Allies advanced across Europe, much of this intelligence remained buried, accessible only to those with the highest security clearance. The sailors returned to ports like Rosyth, Harwich, and Scapa Flow not as celebrated heroes but as men who had glimpsed the edges of a war the public would never fully see. As HMS Blackwood completed its patrol and slipped quietly into harbor in late April 1945, the crew could only reflect on the strange duality of their service. They had contributed to the collapse of a regime, yet the particulars of their missions would remain hidden for decades. Shadowed by secrecy, danger, and the vast expanse of the North Sea, these patrols left lingering questions. How many ships truly vanished without trace? What exact intelligence was secured in these final months? And, most hauntingly, how many of the men who had sailed into the unknown would forever remain ghosts in the official records of naval history? The forbidden patrols had reached their final stage, yet the mysteries they carried would endure long after the war's end. The full scope of the Royal Navy's forbidden patrols during World War II remains one of the most enigmatic chapters of naval history. Even decades after the war, researchers continue to uncover fragments of logs, declassified intelligence reports, and personal diaries that hint at operations so secretive they were never intended to enter the official record. These missions, ranging from reconnaissance along the Norwegian fjords to high-risk patrols off the coasts of occupied France and Germany, reveal a hidden war waged in silence, where bravery, ingenuity, and discretion intersected in the shadow of open conflict. For the men who served, the distinction between success and survival was often indistinguishable, and the line between reality and secrecy blurred. The sailors involved navigated some of the most treacherous waters in Europe under conditions that were physically and psychologically punishing. Months in icy seas, constant threat of enemy engagement, and the burden of absolute secrecy defined their service. Leading seaman Robert Langley, reflecting decades later, wrote, "We sailed knowing that even if we survived, our deeds might never be known. Every patrol was a silent testimony, a story told only to the sea and the ship itself." This duality of danger and invisibility became a defining characteristic of the forbidden patrols, shaping the lives of those aboard and leaving a subtle imprint on the broader narrative of the war. The intelligence collected during these operations was invaluable yet deliberately obscured. Patrols gathered critical information on U-boat movements, coastal defenses, secret harbors, and supply chains. Some vessels carried cryptographers who transmitted encrypted observations to Admiralty analysts, while others facilitated handovers to resistance networks coordinated by the Special Operations Executive. These missions sometimes intersected, producing brief, unexplained encounters between Allied units whose existence was later erased from records. The meticulous secrecy of these operations ensured that the Navy's tactical and technological advancements, such as refinements in ASTIC sonar and radar, remained shielded from enemy discovery, even at the cost of leaving the sailors' sacrifices unrecognized. Several patrols disappeared without a trace, leaving enduring mysteries. Ships like HMS Nightingale, Sparrowhawk, and Kestrel are mentioned only in fragmented logs or survivor accounts, with the circumstances of their missions, engagements, and ultimate fates left ambiguous. Families received little information, while the sailors who returned often carried only partial recollections, constrained by the strict secrecy they had sworn to uphold. These gaps in documentation challenge historians, creating an intricate puzzle of coded communications, declassified intelligence, and eyewitness testimony that continues to be pieced together. The forbidden patrols also highlight the human dimension of covert naval warfare. Crew members had to reconcile the extreme hazards of combat with the burden of anonymity, their courage often unacknowledged for decades. Diaries, letters, and oral histories suggest that these men developed a unique culture of silent resilience, where camaraderie, precision, and trust were paramount. Lieutenant Commander Richard Hastings, reflecting on his 1944 mission along the Norwegian coast, noted, "We relied on each other and on the sea. Recognition was unnecessary, survival and secrecy were our only rewards." As historians examine surviving records, patterns emerge. Forbidden patrols followed strategic imperatives invisible to conventional military planning, targeted high-risk areas, and often intersected with covert intelligence operations that shaped broader campaigns. The Arctic convoys, the Normandy preparations, and the final assaults on Germany all benefited indirectly from intelligence gathered in these secretive missions. Yet the full impact of these patrols remains obscured, their successes and failures interwoven with the silence they demanded. In the end, the story of the Royal Navy's forbidden patrols is a testament to the hidden dimensions of warfare. It is a chronicle of courage under secrecy, skill under pressure, and resilience under conditions that tested every sailor's limits. These missions existed in the spaces between recorded history and unspoken truth, leaving behind fragments that speak to both bravery and mystery. As modern historians reconstruct the events through scattered logs, testimonies, and declassified files, the forbidden patrols reveal a shadow war fought in silence, a maritime battlefield where the line between visibility and obscurity was deliberately, and sometimes dangerously, blurred. And so, the legacy of these patrols endures. Ships that were never officially logged, encounters never publicly acknowledged, and intelligence quietly delivered, all form a hidden mosaic of World War II naval operations. The unanswered questions persist. How many ships truly vanished? What secrets were gathered that shaped the outcome of the war? How many men carried memories of deeds the world would never know? The forbidden Royal Navy patrols remain a haunting reminder of a war fought not only in open battles but in the shadows, where courage, secrecy, and the relentless pursuit of information defined the invisible front lines. The mystery of these operations, once hidden beneath layers of silence and secrecy, continues to challenge our understanding of naval history, leaving a legacy of intrigue that endures to this day.